Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today on structuring water rates for small water systems in Connecticut. This is Glenn Barnes from the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina, and I'm joined today by Cam Walden from the Connecticut Department of Public Health and Tess Clark from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. We are excited to be with you for this program where we'll be talking about how to bring in revenue for your water system. Before we get started, just a quick note on logistics. All attendees will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. So please use the control panel, which you can open by clicking on the orange arrow on the top right of your screen, and use the question box at any time to submit questions to us. We'll answer questions at the end of the hour, and then if there's anything else we can help you with afterwards, we're happy to follow up. So please feel free to use that question box at any time. Today's webinar is the second of 4 that the Environmental Finance Centers are doing in conjunction with the Department of Public Health around Connecticut's new asset management requirements. And the first webinar took place in December on meeting regulations to improve your water system. If you did not get a chance to view that, it's no problem. The content for each of the 4 webinars is separate, but you'll get a link to that, and you can go online and watch the recording of that webinar at any time. As I mentioned, this is the second in the series, and there are 2 more coming up. So please join us on Tuesday, January 29th for a webinar on considering regionalization options for small system sustainability. And then on February 13th, there will be a webinar on managing your water system under pressure, new requirements for hydrodynamic tanks and water loss. So again, all of these webinars are free of charge and are centered around the state's new asset management requirements. For today, however, we'll be talking specifically about understanding how to pay for the cost of running your water system and looking more closely at how rates can be structured with examples of small non-governmental systems from across the country. So again, the new regulations in Connecticut apply to non-governmental community water systems serving 1,000 or fewer people. Now, if you're listening in on today's call and that doesn't quite meet your system description, everything we'll talk about will still be relevant for you, but we have pulled together examples from around the country of exactly those types of systems serving under 1,000 people and community non-governmental systems to show you how those rates are structured. And we've got a couple of examples from here in Connecticut and from New England, but in order to find enough to kind of flesh out our entire presentation, we're looking at some other examples from North Carolina and Georgia, from Missouri, Arizona, where these types of systems are very common, and even from as far away as our friends in Hawaii. So as I said, the objectives today, understand how to pay for the cost of running the system and look more closely at how rates can be structured. And so I'm going to begin that by talking a little bit about customer sales. So for some of you, water is included as part of an overall rent or an HOA fee or something else that you're charging to customers. But if you have a differential charge for water, or even if you don't in those circumstances, what you're essentially doing is what's called fixed revenue. So that revenue is going to be consistent month in and month out, and it is not dependent on the volume of water used. This could include the base charge, could be called a monthly minimum, a ready-to-use fee, a meter fee, lots of different names for the same idea that all of your customers every month or every billing period, which could be quarterly, biannually, annually, they are going to pay you a flat amount of money just for being a water customer. And then there are variable revenues. These are the revenues that are linked to the actual sale of the volume of water used. So not every system does this, but if you do meter for water, you can have a rate that reflects the usage. So the more water a customer uses, the higher the bill would be per month or per billing period. So this is pretty straightforward, a base charge and a volumetric charge, also sometimes called a commodity charge. Now, there's a couple options here for you as water systems in terms of revenue. And one is that you can have all fixed revenue. So you can just say water is $20 a month, regardless of usage. We're not going to meter. That is one way to bring in revenue. And it's something that we see for smaller water systems that they will often use that approach. For example, this is the Cedar Green land acquisition water system in Missouri. They do a quarterly flat rate of about $80.37 per living unit, and that is their water rate. So if somebody uses 1,000 gallons a quarter, they pay $80. If they use 20,000 gallons a quarter, they pay $80. You're just paying to access the water system. Another example, a little bit closer to Connecticut from New Hampshire, this is Wildwood Water Company, and they do a charge of $130.50 per quarter, and again, it is unlimited water use, so there's no metering involved, and this is an option. It's all fixed revenue for the water system. Now, the flip side of that is that you can do a rate structure that is looking at all variable revenue. So there's no monthly fixed fee or quarterly fixed fee. It's entirely based on the volume of water that a customer is using. So that bill would have to be metered, and then it's based on that volume of use. So this is the Coahuila Plantation Homeowners Association in Hawaii. They have a completely volumetric rate. So actually a rather low rate of $1 per 1,000 gallons for the first 60,000 gallons of their billing period. And then the rate goes up as the usage goes up. I think they have a lot of, as the plantation in their name may imply, agriculture within the area, so they have some very high water users. But essentially, their water rate is completely based on the volume of water used. So there's no monthly charge coming in. It's just all on the volumetric side. Here's another example from Missouri, Middle Fork Water Company. And so they have a new rate as of May of 2011 that is $2.71 per 1,000 gallons of usage. And again, there is no monthly minimum. It is 100% based on volumetric use. But a lot of water systems will do some mix of the two. There will be some fixed revenue and some variable revenue. And the balance of those is really unique to each water system. So one example, right from our home state of Connecticut, the Old Newgate Ridge Water Company, they do a minimum quarterly charge of $65.47, and then their commodity charge per 1,000 gallons consumed is $5.84. So many systems around the country do this balance of fixed and variable rates. So what we want to do now is just launch a quick polling question for you, because we'd like to understand your water rates in particular and what it is that you're charging. So please go ahead and answer, what rate structure does your water system have? So if you have a flat charge for unlimited water use, or it's included in rent or HOA fees, please check the first box. If you're only volumetric, the second. If you do a mix of the two, the third, or if it's something we're not thinking of, go ahead and pick the fourth option. And we'll give you just a couple of seconds to answer that poll. Okay, and we'll go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and here's our results. Looks like a good number of you are doing a mix of base and volumetric already, and then some of you are just doing a flat fee. It doesn't seem like anybody's doing volumetric, and a couple of you are doing something else, or maybe you're not from a water system. So even here, we see a blending of these, and I think what we want to get into in the rest of our presentation before we turn it over to Cam later in the hour to talk about some of the funding that's available is to really get at this question, so which rates are right? Which rate structure is right? Should I do a flat rate? Should I do all volumetric? Should I do some mix of the above? And we're going to give you our standard answer for most things, which is highly unhelpful in a lot of ways to begin with, but it depends. And I think it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do with your rates and what behavior you want to encourage from your customers and what situation you're facing as a water system. So real briefly, we'll talk about water system objectives. We've done entire hour-long webinars just talking about these objectives and how they tie to rates. But real quickly, one objective that we often see for water systems is that they want full cost recovery. So they want their rates and revenues to bring in enough money to run the system today and into the future. In fact, I hope all systems have that as a goal. And tied to that is some type of revenue stability. So any of the types of rate structures we talked about, all base, all volumetric, or some mix, can help get you to full cost recovery if water is priced appropriately. But some of the other objectives is where we start to see a bit of a difference. So for example, if you want to encourage conservation, so you may have limited water supply, you want to hold your costs down, you don't maybe have limited storage capacity, or whatever the case will be, there's drought in the area, you want to encourage conservation. Well, if you have a water rate structure that says pay us $10 a month and use as much water as you want to, that probably doesn't encourage conservation. If you have a rate that says water is $1 per 1,000 gallons, that probably doesn't encourage conservation. So how you structure a rate, say having a mix of base and variable, or maybe all variable, or a higher variable charge, or the rate gets more expensive as water use goes up, that might be a way to structure rates to encourage conservation. We also see in a lot of cases that systems want to be business friendly. So for some of you that are HOAs or condos, this might be a moot point. You might be all residential, but for any of you who also have some shops or businesses, maybe a restaurant or a golf course that you're serving, and you want to make water a little bit cheaper for those businesses to encourage them to stay there and to use water, again, how you structure the rates may tie into that. And then finally, what's often a concern for a lot of systems is keeping water rates affordable. Now, what does it mean for water to be affordable? Again, we could spend an hour or a day or a week kind of delving into that question. But in general, we have ways to help you at your system think about whether or not your customers can afford the rates that you're charging and how that balances with full cost recovery. And I think what's really tricky with these objectives, and as we get into the different ways you can structure rates, is that these objectives, you probably have more than one. And those 2 or 3 that you have may conflict a little bit. If you really care about full cost recovery, for example, you maybe need to price your water a little bit higher, but that could lead to an affordability problem. If you want to encourage conservation, again, you want to price the water a little bit higher. Well, that may not be business friendly. And if you want to encourage conservation and then your customers actually conserve, that can cut into your full cost recovery potential. So whenever we're talking about structuring rates, it really is more of a painful art than a science. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And if you're struggling with this, we would love to help you. We have free technical assistance for groups for any water system under 10,000 people, which I'm sure is everybody on the line today. And there are other great technical assistance providers who can help you with this. I think we have some of our friends from RCAP Solutions are joining us today. They're another group that you could go to for assistance on these types of issues. So these are the water system objectives that are out there. And what I want to talk about for the balance of my time is how you can tie different rate structure designs into those objectives and some examples of that. So we're going to go through each of these 7 areas in a tiny bit of detail before passing on to Cam later in the hour. So the first thing I want to talk about are customer classes. So for many of you, if you have a very homogeneous system where, say, it's all residential customers, you probably just have one rate structure for all, and everybody is treated equally. And that's simply, it's a simple and fair way of structuring your rates. And it's something that we see often with these small non-governmental community systems. So this is the By-Gain Water Company in Arizona. They have $13.50 as their base rate, and then they have an increasing block rate from there. But everybody in their water company pays this rate. There's no distinction between customers. And this is one option that you have open to you. But it's not the only option that you have. If you do have some difference in your water customers, say that you have some residential, you have some commercial or governmental, you may sell water in wholesale or in bulk, you may have irrigation meters that are separate, you can set up a rate structure along those lines. And so this is an example from the Hartford Water Authority, not Hartford, Connecticut, but the small area of Hartford, Georgia, where they have residential rates and then they have commercial rates. And these rates are, as you can see on the screen, different, both in the per gallon rate and in the allowance as well. So this is just one example of kind of breaking rates up based on customer class. We also see, and this may be of interest to some of you, seasonal rates. So this is the East Northfield Water Company in Massachusetts that has a separate rate for seasonal customers. So year-round customers are given one rate, and then the seasonal customers, when they come in, are given a different rate, and the rate is higher during the high season. So for some of you, summer may be the high season. For some of you, winter may be the high season. But this is an example of a rate where during the time that water use goes up significantly, the rate changes to take into account those customers that are coming in for part of the year. Another choice that is out there is to keep the rate structure the same, but to vary that monthly minimum charge based on the meter size or based on usage. And so here's an example, again, from Connecticut, Preston Plains Water Company, where they have meter sizes ranging from a 5/8 inch meter up to a 10-inch meter. Those monthly minimum service or quarterly service charge, vary, as you can see here, from $22.59 a quarter up to $153 a quarter. But then the volumetric rate represented at the bottom of the screen there, 742 per thousand gallons, is consistent for all customers at all levels of usage. So the bill will vary based on the meter charge, which ties into that fixed revenue, but the volumetric charge is the same. But obviously, some of these larger size meters are most likely using quite a bit more water. Here's another example from the Antelope Water Company in Arizona, where they vary monthly usage charges from $13.50 to $675 based on the meter size, but then everybody pays the same commodity charge for water. Now, sometimes we see that there is a rate structure for all, but the blocks of that rate structure are set up in a way that essentially only a non-residential or non-domestic use customer would get there. And so it's probably easier to explain this from an example. So this is the Hana water system in Hawaii, where if you see at the bottom there, the monthly water consumption rate, it's 1,000 gallons per month. Per 1,000 gallons per month up to 25,000 gallons is $1.42, and then above 25,000 gallons a month is $1.14. Now, the vast majority of residential water customers are not going to get above 25,000 gallons a month unless they have a very big family or they're doing a lot of irrigation outside. This water system has people who have kind of flower farms or small agricultural operations on their properties. So this rate, it's one rate structure for all, but essentially the only people getting in that above 25,000 gallon category are going to be people doing some kind of commercial activity within their account. And then finally, we see water systems that have a negotiated rate with an individual high-use customer. So this may be if you're selling water in bulk to another water system, or it could be some type of industrial customer or a hospital or some kind of institutional customer. But essentially, they will have a rate for everybody else and then a negotiated rate with a single system. And this is an example from the High Country Pines Water Company in Arizona, where they have their rate structure, and then at the bottom in the box I've highlighted that they have a special rate for the Salvation Army Youth Camp. So they have negotiated a rate with that individual customer for that gallon charge and monthly meter charge, and that only applies to that one customer. Sometimes we recommend, rather than doing it for a single customer like this, to kind of define the parameters. So if a water user is, using X number of gallons per month and is of a certain size, they would get this rate. So that way, theoretically, if a, second youth camp opened up in High Country Pines, similar to the Salvation Army one, they would automatically get that rate. So that's the quick discussion on customer classes. And again, if you want any help to think about this, please feel free to reach out to us after the webinar, and we'll be glad to talk through your current rates and some options that you have and share any of these examples. And I should have mentioned at the top of the hour, not only are we recording the webinar and we'll make it available for you after the fact, but we'll also send you a copy of the slides. So you'll get a copy of all of these sample rate sheets, and we can provide these and more to you if you're interested. So moving on to billing period. Water systems can bill as frequently as monthly. I guess technically they could bill more frequently, but we usually see monthly as the most frequent, and then less frequently, quarterly, biannually, sometimes even annually. The advantage of monthly billing, I think, is threefold. First is that it's more steady revenue coming in for your water system. The second is your customers are probably more used to paying monthly bills for all of their charges, other utilities like cable and heating, electricity, etc. So that makes it a little bit easier on them. And the third is if a customer has a leak on the customer side of the meter, which would be their responsibility, let's say typically they use 5,000 gallons a month and all of a sudden they get a bill for 50 or 80,000 gallons a month and there's probably a leak, they're going to be able to catch that leak more quickly if they're getting feedback from you on their usage, i.e. a bill and a reported usage on a regular basis. Now, the disadvantage of monthly billing is that you've got to bill monthly. So that's going to include the cost of sending out the bills, collecting the bills, and if you have meters, of reading those meters as well. So for water systems, it's a bit of a balancing act. If you can afford to bill more frequently, like monthly, we generally find the revenues for systems are more steady. It helps with that revenue stability and full cost recovery that we talked about earlier. It's easier on customers and gives them that more immediate feedback on their usage. Again, a good thing if you're trying to encourage conservation. If you're not able to do monthly or can't afford that or don't have the capacity, bill as frequently as you feel like you're able to. Now, the base charge, or the fee that is paid to customers just for having an account, monthly, quarterly, however often you bill, this is an important part of your revenue stability. So a good number of you answered at the top of the webinar that you don't have volumetric charges. So essentially all you have is a base charge. But for those of you who have a mix of volumetric and base, you want to pay attention to this particular base charge. Now, a higher base charge, higher dollar amount base charge per billing period is going to be helpful for you as a system in terms of revenue stability. So you're going to be able to count on that revenue regardless of usage. That's especially helpful if you have customers who might come and go throughout the year, if you have snowbirds or college students or part-year residents, that they keep their accounts open for the entire year. That might be really helpful for you in terms of revenue stability. And it's just something that you can count on. This money is going to come in the door. It's going to help me pay the bill. The disadvantage of a higher base charge, I think, comes in two places. So the first is that if you have low use, low income customers, and I think the proverbial example of this is the widow or widower who is, on Social Security using 1,000 or 1,500 gallons a month. If there's a high base charge, the bill that low use, low income customer pays may not be substantially different from, say, a normal household that uses 4,000 or 5,000 gallons a month instead. And so the lower income customer, from an affordability standpoint, doesn't have as much control over the bill. So they would probably prefer to have more of that in the volumetric side, less of it in the base charge. So that way, if they use a low amount, they would pay a very low bill. But if you do set up a rate structure that way of a lower base charge and a higher volumetric, it can be a little bit risky for you in terms of that full cost recovery. If people cut back their usage for any reason, you're going to see more of a hit in your revenue. Now, beyond affordability concerns, the other potential issue for a higher base charge is conservation. So if you really want to encourage conservation, you really want to put more of the emphasis on the volumetric charge and less on the base charge. And I think for that reason, we want to make sure that, you're setting up your rates in that kind of a way. But again, there is a bit of a risk to you in setting up the rates in that way in terms of your revenue stability. Okay, so in terms of consumption allowance with the base charge, so you may decide with that base charge to not include any gallons. Now again, if you are a flat fee or included in the HOA fees or mobile home park rent or condo fees, you're actually including unlimited consumption within the base charge. But if you do volumetric, you have the option of thinking about whether that monthly or every billing period charge would include some amount of usage. Now, we would say the national trend here is towards 0 gallons. And we do rate surveys in a number of states around the country for systems of all sizes, including Connecticut. We see kind of a trend towards not including any usage. We see some systems that include a kind of higher amount of usage, 3, 4, 5,000 gallons a month or more. And then some that will be kind of right in the middle. They may include a small amount like 1,000 gallons a month or something to that extent. And often if they are including something like 1,000 gallons a month, it's what we call a lifeline amount. So in other words, that's enough that really low income widower that we talked about earlier, they could live on 1,000 gallons or 1,500 gallons a month. And so if that's included in the base charge, they know that as long as they can come up with the amount of money per billing period to pay the base charge, that they will have enough water to survive on. So one example of no gallons included is the Hecthorne Water Company in Arizona, where every gallon is charged. Now you can imagine Arizona being a particularly dry state that they probably want to encourage conservation, and these types of no gallon included are definitely more prevalent in the desert west as we've looked at rate structures around the country, but certainly we find them in other parts of the country as well. Some gallons included. The Stockton Hills Water Company in Missouri includes the first 1,000 gallons in their residential monthly minimum charge. And then we see kind of higher gallons included. This is the Millennium Water Association in North Carolina. Their water flat rate per month includes the first 3,000 gallons. And the Fim Water Company in Arizona actually includes the first 4,000 gallons in their monthly minimum charge. So again, you have some flexibility here. The more gallons you include, though, just don't exceed what would be a typical usage for most of your customers if you have any desire to encourage conservation. Now, for those of you who do volumetric charges or are thinking about volumetric charges, we wanted to talk a little bit about how you might set those up. So by far and away, the most prevalent rate structure we see are uniform or flat rates. And what that means is that the per gallon usage of water does not change based on the level of consumption. So in this example, it's $3 per thousand. If you use 1,000 gallons, it's $3 per thousand. If you use 4,000 gallons, it's $3 per thousand. If you use 20,000 gallons, it doesn't matter. So as you look at that bill, what happens is then there's a little bit of the base charge, and then the bill just climbs in a straight, steady line every 1,000 gallons. And some of you may use 100 cubic feet or other units of measurement. That's fine. You can set the price accordingly. Now, the escapees at North Ranch Utilities in Arizona has this type of rate structure where it's $12 per month, and then it's $1.20 per 1,000 gallons for the commodity. Just very basic uniform rate. A little bit more closely, the East Northfield Water Company also does this, and again, they have all year round customers. They have seasonal customers that we mentioned earlier, and so they are doing volumetric rates for 100 cubic feet. It varies by customer classification, but it does not vary based on usage. So at all levels of usage, it'll either be 564 or 648 or 1490 for these customers. Now, there's another type of rate structure that you can use called increasing block rates, and these are more conservation oriented. And the way that these work is that the rate would start off at one level, say $2 per 1,000 gallons for the first 4,000 gallons. And then after that, the bill would change to a different level, say $4 per 1,000 gallons at a higher usage level. So in other words, the higher the usage goes, the higher the bill is going to go. And so one example of this here is the Napulu water system in Hawaii. So they have a rate where the first 5,000 gallons is at one rate, 5,000 to 15,000 is at another rate, and then above 15,000 is at a third rate. So again, pretty standard rate structure and geared towards encouraging conservation. Now, if you have commercial customers, you can also do a decreasing block rate where the higher the use goes, the lower it goes. We saw some examples of that earlier from that HANA Water Systems. And if you're interested in that, we'll be happy to talk to you in a little bit more detail. But there's a couple things I want to touch on with these block designs. The first is that in order for this rate structure to be effective, what you're really trying to send a message to your customer that the higher the usage goes, the higher and higher they'll be paying for water, and that perhaps they want to slow down and cut back on that discretionary usage. First off, you want to decide what are the correct number of blocks we want to have. There's not a magic right answer for this, but there certainly are some wrong answers. I'll show you an example of one in a couple minutes here. You should also think about where those blocks should start and end. So you want to think about, like, okay, is it the first 4,000 gallons? Is it the first 5,000? Is it 5 to 10 or 5 to 15? We've got some spreadsheet tools to help you work that out. And then I think most importantly, you want to set up a pretty significant rate differential between the blocks. So in other words, if your goal is to price water in such a way that the more they use, you're going to encourage customers to cut back because they're going to see their bill jump up, you want the difference between the blocks to be somewhat significant. And I think we've seen that in a couple of the examples that we have here. Now, if you're doing this, keep in mind what your base charge is in consumption allowance. If the consumption allowance is 3,000 gallons in the base charge and then the first block cuts off at 4,000 gallons, that's not really very helpful because customers are going to get that first 3,000 gallons included in what they're paying every month. So you be wary of your base charge and consumption allowance when you do this. And often when we see with an increase in block rate, that allowance is either very small or sometimes zero. Second point here is that you have to read your meters punctually. If you're going to base increasing block rates on a 30-day billing period, and in 1 month you accidentally don't read the meters till day 32, and some people go just over that block amount, they're going to rightly say to you, hey, if you had read my meter on time, I would have been under that level. I would have been paying a lower amount. So you have to be very punctual about meters, and you want to replace meters frequently, or at least test out the accuracy of meters to make sure that you're recovering the full amount of what you're billing. You should be doing that regardless of the type of rate structure you have, but it's even more important with an increase in block rate. And then finally, you should think about large families. So the whole idea of increasing block rates is that it's getting at discretionary water use. So if somebody has a really bright green lawn or a swimming pool or a hot tub, they don't need that water to live on, but they're choosing to consume it. That may be where you want to target them for conservation. But if in fact they are just a large family of grandparents, parents, and kids all living under the same roof, per capita their water use may not be that much, but in sum their water use could be quite large. And they may not be able to do much of anything to cut back on the water use. So an increasing block rate might just hurt them financially. So please keep that in mind. And again, we can help or show you some places where you can look up information about the size of families if you're not familiar with the customers that you're serving in your area. Now, I mentioned we have an example of a rate structure that is not really very well designed. I did not make this up. This is an actual rate structure, but you can see every 1,000 gallons, the price changes. And in some cases changes as little as 12 cents or 25 cents per 1,000 gallons. And this is not going to really encourage conservation. It's going to be confusing to customers, and it's probably just going to cause a lot of headaches for your billing people. So this is from an actual water system that we assisted a few years ago. We managed to get this down to something much more reasonable for them. I think it was maybe 3 tiers instead of the 10 tiers we currently have here. And, you know, a little bit of a cleaner rate structure now with a much greater differential. But again, if you're interested in doing this, there's not a magic right answer for the number of blocks, but something like this, I think you would find to not be very effective. Now, you should review your water rates every year. It does not mean that you have to change your rates every year, but you should at least review them to make sure that they're adequately covering the total cost of running the water system today and into the future. And we have some tools to help you look at the financial health of your water system. So things like calculating how much money you're bringing in versus spending, how you're able to cover the future capital needs you have, how you can pay your current bills, things like that. If you run those numbers and see that your water system is not in such good shape, you may want to consider a rate increase. But the other point that we wanted to make here is that some water systems have started to raise their rates essentially every year automatically based on inflation or based on a kind of set amount. So it's true that our costs are constantly going up. If you pay people to work in your water system, for example, I know some of you on the line are probably all volunteer, but if you pay people for your water system, you're probably paying them a little bit more every year. You may have a situation where you are seeing electric rates go up for your water system. You may be seeing the price of chemicals go up, things like that. So every year you should expect your cost to go up a couple of percentage points at the least. And that's true for, you know, the cost of anything. It's tied to inflation. So one idea is that some systems have started to say, you know, every year we know we need to go up at least, say, 2% or whatever the consumer price index is or some measure. And then if we're doing a big capital project, we can do a greater rate increase. We have the discretion to do that, but at least every year it's going to go up a little bit because we've certainly worked with water systems where the rates haven't gone up in 10 years, 15 years, 20, 25 years, even longer. And when the rates finally do have to go up, they have to go up a rather significant amount, 50%, 75%, double in some cases. And that can be really hard on customers to keep up with. It's much easier for customers to handle a small regular rate increase year after year than it is to not have one for a long time and then have to face a really significant rate increase. And I think the bottom line of this is that we hope that you don't look at water rates. I mean, obviously, we want to care about affordability for customers and whether or not they can pay those rates. But maintaining low rates at the expense of your system's financial health is not a good practice. Low rates for the sake of low rates is not a really sustainable long-term practice. And instead, we want you to think about having rates that are appropriate to cover the full cost of providing service today and into the future, and that meet those objectives that you have as a water system. And if affordability is one of them, there's other ways that we can look into helping lower income customers be able to afford rates that are set appropriately. So just a couple of quick things to mention before I pass the mic on to Cam. And the first is, if you're listening today from a local government or from a homeowners association or some type of nonprofit water system, you do not have to pay attention to the next 30 seconds of what I'm going to say. But if you are from a private water company or a privately owned water company like a mobile home park or something like that, if you are instituting volumetric rates for water and if you serve at least 50 people, you may fall under the regulation of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority in Connecticut. And so if that is the case, this state agency would be getting involved in your rate-making process and would have to sign off on it, because the idea is that if you're a local government, you have an elected board that approves those rates. If your customers don't like them, they can replace the board. Similarly, with a homeowner association or a condo association, there will be a board signing off on the rates, and if customers are unhappy, they can replace the board. But if you're the sole proprietor of a mobile home park and you change the rates, whatever you change them to is completely to your discretion. You're essentially a monopoly without that level of oversight, and the only option your customers would have would be to leave. So this state agency exists to help in those particular circumstances to oversee how rates are done. And so encourage you to reach out to them if you fit that description, a privately owned business enterprise or water company looking to do volumetric rates, and you're serving at least 50 people. Please reach out to the state agency and understand what their process is so you're falling under the regulation appropriately. I mentioned some of the resources we have. My colleague Shadi Eskaf wrote a great guide about designing rate structures that support your objectives. It was originally written for North Carolina, but it is universally applicable, and so this is a free resource available on our website. And again, when you get a copy of the slide deck, you can go and download these free resources. And then the other is the rates analysis model that we have. It's a spreadsheet tool that you can download, put in your current rate structure and some information about your usage, and then put in some alternative rate structures, and it will show you how your revenues will look. And again, if you'd like some help with this tool, just reach out to us and we will be happy to assist you. So that's a kind of quick overview on how water rates are structured. My contact information is up on the screen. You can call me or email me anytime that you have questions, and we're here to help. And I think that having appropriate revenue is going to be really important now as the state is instituting the new asset management regulation and requirements, because that's going to really help you think about the future of your water system. But you're going to need money to keep your system running today, to deal with the future capital needs that you have. And hopefully as you start to do asset management plans, and you're going to see, oh, 5 years from now, we're going to have to replace a big asset, or 10 years from now, how you price water for that full cost recovery can help you get there, as well as meeting your other objectives. So that is it for my portion of the program. I want to pass it over to Cam Walden from the Connecticut Department of Public Health, and he's going to take us to the top of the hour talking about some of the state programs that are tied to revenues and financing. So Cam, take it away.
Thank you, Glenn. Good evening. I'm Cam Walden. I supervise the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund for the Department of Public Health here in Connecticut. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that fund as a means of financing drinking water infrastructure projects. So now that Glenn has told you how to make revenue, I'm going to talk a little bit about spending it on infrastructure improvements. And it's going to be a brief introduction to the program. So it won't cover everything, but at least give you an exposure to this as an option that you have available to you for financing your infrastructure projects. The fund has been around since about 1998, so we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. In those 20 years, we have given over 150 loans for approximately $350 million to water systems in Connecticut for infrastructure improvements. But the fund provides long-term, low-interest loans to community and nonprofit, non-community public water systems for infrastructure projects that improve public health, regulatory compliance, and sustainability. So the fund is intended to really keep existing infrastructure in good condition in perpetuity for the customers here in Connecticut. It is not intended to be used for expansion projects or capital or infrastructure expansion, economic development projects, that type of thing. It's really to keep the existing infrastructure in good condition for all the customers in perpetuity. It is a competitive loan program, so we do have a limited amount of money available each year. Typically, in the past few years, we have had more money than we have had projects, so we have been able to finance pretty much every project that has been submitted to us that is ready to proceed. The projects are ranked according to a point-based priority ranking system. That ranking system is available on our website, and you can review it to see what your system or what your project would score. but there is no limit on the loan amount. Our repayment terms are up to 20 years. Our interest rates are half of the market rate, and the funds can be used for planning, design, and construction, or any combination of any of those three. Certain projects, and I'll talk a little bit about it, may be eligible for state or federal grant contributions, so we do subsidize many of our projects, and we can co-fund projects with other programs like the Rural Development Program under the Department of Agriculture. With regard to the state grant funding, and since we have a small system audience, I really want to talk about how that would relate to small systems. And we do offer state grants for consolidation. So if you have an older small water system that needs significant investment, you always want to look at consolidation as a potential option. And that is really connecting to a larger community water system, if you have one in close proximity, as a means of reducing both your capital improvement costs, but also your long-term operating costs. Typically, economies of scale are achieved with a higher level of customers, so consolidating with a larger system makes a lot of sense when you're looking at significant investment. This state grant program provides state grant funding as part of a DWSRF loan to not-for-profit public water systems for regional interconnection or consolidation projects, but it also provides grant funding for the associated infrastructure improvements that may be necessary to facilitate those interconnections. So not only to extend the water service from the larger system, but if you have older pipes in the ground that need to be replaced, we can also subsidize those improvements as well. Small systems that serve 10,000 or fewer people are eligible for up to a 50% subsidy under that program, and larger systems over 10,000 up to a 30% subsidy. I know the EFC has covered asset and fiscal management plans in a prior webinar that's available if you need to become familiar with those plans, but we do have a requirement under this program that any borrower has an asset and fiscal management plan in order to qualify for the grant funding. $20 million was originally appropriated under this program back in 2015. That money has all been allocated to projects in southeastern Connecticut, but we are looking to identify other projects that are in need of this grant funding so that we can go back to the legislature and make a case for additional appropriations under this program. I wanted to talk about a couple of programs that we put together particularly for small systems that have infrastructure projects under $100,000 that has really streamlined a lot of the SRF requirements. With state and federal funding come a lot of state and federal requirements. Some of them can be overwhelming for small systems and require them to hire an engineer and to help them navigate through those requirements and complete their projects. So we've streamlined some requirements for some non-construction projects that really are geared towards the purchase and installation or replacement of drinking water related equipment. So these projects cannot involve construction of new facilities, building additions, or site work. So none of the traditional construction activities, but some of the requirements that we've streamlined are you do not need to pay prevailing wage rates because these are not construction workers, so that can reduce the labor costs. We have a three-quote procurement method for contractors that will eliminate some of the procurement costs for these projects where you just have contractors come in and give you three quotes, or you get three contractors to give you a quote for the project, and we will pay the lowest quote. We have two programs that I'll briefly describe, the Emergency Power Generator Program and our new small loan program. The loan terms for these projects, because they are smaller cost projects, the terms are smaller than our maximum 20-year term. So they are based on the loan amount, $0 to $10,000. It's a 3-year loan, $10,000 to $25,000, a 5-year loan, and $25,000 to $100,000, a 10-year loan. The Emergency Power Generator Program, we started that back in 2011. If anybody remembers back that far, we had 3 large storms that came through the state in about an 18-month period that put a lot of our small systems out of power for, in some cases, over a week, 7 to 10 days, and create a lot of problems for their customers because they had no water service during that time because there was no backup power provisions. So we developed this program very quickly in collaboration with EPA to get small systems backup power plants. And under that program, currently we subsidize these projects at a 45% subsidy, and we've given over 50 loans to date for backup power systems. So it's been a very successful program for us in reaching some of our small systems. Based on the success of that program, last year we launched a small loan program because there are a lot of similar projects and needs with our small systems for other drinking water related equipment. And again, these are non-construction projects under $100,000, but to purchase and install or replace various water system equipment, and mostly treatment systems or pumps or similar equipment that has either exceeded its useful service life, or due to new regulations that are groundwater rule and lead and copper rule, they may need to install a treatment system to comply with our regulations. So if all you need to do is either install treatment or replace treatment equipment, replace pumps or install pumps, and you don't need new facilities, you have existing facilities to house this equipment, those are the types of projects that would qualify for loans under this program, where you really wouldn't need to hire an engineer to help you through the loan program, and it would significantly reduce your administrative costs to get these projects underway. These projects under the small loan program currently qualify for a 25% federal subsidy, and our subsidy is based on the loan amount. So, you know, if you have a project that costs $10,000 and you're only asking for $5,000 of SRF funding, we would subsidize the $5,000 at whatever the subsidy percentage is. So if we finance the entire project, you would get a $2,500 subsidy on a $10,000 project. If we only finance $5,000 of that project, that would be cut in half. So that's important to know. We have a lot of borrowers, small systems, that have come to us strictly for the grant funding, and unfortunately we cannot provide just grant dollars. We have to provide SRF funding that includes both loan and subsidy. But the good news is there is no penalty for early repayment on the loan, and so those loans funds, if you really just want the subsidy, you can repay the loan immediately after we close on the loan. Now, we expect next year we probably will have over $100 million available to finance infrastructure projects. Each year, we really focus on meeting the small systems needs. So we reserve 15% of the available funds each year for small water systems that serve fewer than 10,000 people. We have a difficult time each year achieving that level. So if you are a small system and you need funding, even though the loan program is competitive, and even though your project is ranked according to a point-based ranking system, if you're a small system and you apply for a loan and your project is ready to go, there is a very strong chance, or almost a guaranteed chance, that we will have funding available for your project. So do not hesitate to apply for a loan for fear that your project may not get funding. The biggest obstacles in funding really is having projects that are ready to go. So as soon as you're ready to go, give us a call and we'd be happy to talk to you about financing. A couple of the things that are important to understand, though, is that under the program, you must have an asset management plan or agree to prepare and implement an asset management plan as part of your project. So again, the Environmental Finance Center has given I think the first webinar was on asset and fiscal management plans. That is available on their EFCN network site. And we'd be happy also to talk to you about those plans if you need to prepare them. We have technical assistance providers available to assist you with those plans, and we also have staff that are very capable of helping you put those plans together. For most small water systems, an asset management plan may seem overwhelming task to undertake, but they're not that difficult to understand and put together. So, and they provide tremendous benefit when it comes down to things like structuring your rates and figuring out what your capital needs are going forward. So they are very important to put together as part of proper management of your water system. Again, a fiscal management plan is also a requirement, but we only require that it be prepared in the future, and under our regulations, it's now required to be prepared in the future. So the fiscal management plan isn't as important to receiving a loan as the asset management plan at this time. In addition, any system we give loan money to must demonstrate technical, financial, and managerial capacity to operate and maintain a public water system. It's part of our due diligence. You know, the fund is intended to keep these systems in good repair so the customers have water in perpetuity. So we need to make sure that the managerial structure and operations of that water system are geared towards that. So we do look at the ability to repay the loan, the credit worthiness of the applicant, and we work with the state treasurer's office to qualify those borrowers for loans. I've got my contact information up here. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that's interested in SRF financing. We have a group of very diligent engineers that have been in the program for a long time and understand the needs of small systems and can help you navigate through the loan process. So we also are available to meet with boards, water boards if you have them, or other groups that manage your water system. We can go to meetings or have conference calls to discuss some of the requirements and also some of the loan details that board members may want to become familiar with. So don't hesitate to give me a call. My email address is up there as well. And with that, I will open it up to any questions, and over to Tess.
All right. So we are accepting questions. Go ahead and type them in if you can. We only have a few minutes, so we probably won't take a ton, but if you do have a question, please type it in, and regardless, we will make sure we follow up with you either now or via email. So I do have one question to get us started, which I think applies to both Cam and Glenn, so maybe Glenn, you can answer first. How do rate structures fit into asset management planning?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I think the brief answer is that an asset management plan is going to show you, you know, in the broadest terms, what assets do you own, what condition are they in, and approximately when are you going to need to replace them. And obviously it tells you a lot more than that. But part of that asset management plan is going to be, do you have the money you need to replace them, or where are you going to find the money, whether it's through one of the loan or subsidy programs that Cam talked about, maybe through USDA or some other programs or through the revenue that you collect from your customers, part of that is going to have to be paid for out of customer revenue. Even a loan will eventually be paid for by your customers. So how you set up your rates to take in the full cost of operations today and into the future will be directly tied to the capital needs you have in your water system.
Great. And then Cam, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question as well, given Connecticut's new regulations.
Similar to Glenn, I've always looked at asset management plans as kind of the foundation of your rate structure, because you really need to. We have a lot of water systems in Connecticut, small water systems that were built in the 50s and 60s. They have survived on charging to cover their operating costs and never really thought about having reserve funding available to replace those assets when they fail. So a lot of your assets are buried. The condition is not known until something breaks. A water main breaks, or a water main becomes fouled to the point where people aren't getting adequate water pressure. So you really need to have that reserve funding, understand your capital needs moving forward, so that when things start to near the end of the useful service life, you don't get in a situation like Glenn mentioned earlier, where you haven't raised your rates in 20 years and all of a sudden you're doubling or tripling your water rates to pay for some of these infrastructure costs. So it really gives you what you need to understand the full cost pricing of what it takes to run a water system. So it's kind of the foundation, I think, of developing water rates. And part of that obviously is operating and maintenance costs, but capital costs are important to understand.
Awesome. Okay, and then one more question for you, Cam. This is specific to the DWSRF. Does a water storage tank replacement or refurbishment qualify for DWSRF funding?
That's a very good question, and it's a question that probably will come up again in a couple of webinars when we start talking about hydropneumatic tank replacements. To replace a water storage tank, if the tank is buried, you would need to excavate and get that tank removed in most cases, or use heavy equipment to install the new tank. So those would be considered construction projects. They wouldn't qualify under that small loan program that I mentioned earlier. We can finance those projects, but right now they would be financed as a traditional SRF project, and for the most part, you would need to hire an engineer to prepare bidding packages that include all the prevailing wage rate requirements that EPA requires, and put those out to public bid. So we can, additional administrative costs to get those projects financed, but we can finance them, but not through that. They would be considered construction projects and not eligible under that small loan program. I do want to mention, though, that when we developed that program, we had in mind hydropneumatic tanks. And there is another option we are encouraging small water systems to consider, and that is converting from traditional hydropneumatic storage to variable speed drives on their pumps, which can be used in combination with smaller bladder tanks that could be installed in a pump house or somewhere else that would qualify under that small loan program. So if you can abandon a hydropneumatic tank in place and replace it with VFD pumps and bladder tanks, we could finance those projects through that small loan program. And I hope that might be covered in that webinar, but certainly you could call us and we could talk to you more about that.
Okay, great. And then I have one last housekeeping thing to do, which is to ask you all about Technical assistance, as Glenn's alluded to a few times, one thing that the EFCN does is provide technical assistance to small water systems, and this can be about rate structures or asset management or a variety of other topics. So if you know that you might need some help with these new regulations, feel free to let us know here and someone will be in touch with you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just close this poll, and I'm going to hand it back over to Glenn to say some closing comments.
Okay, well, first off, I just want to say a thank you to Cam for joining us, and a great thank you to the Department of Public Health on their ongoing partnership on these webinars. You know, I think these new regulations in the state, I hope as systems come to understand more about them, will really be very helpful in the long-term sustainability of systems. And please know that there's lots of good people out there, from the state to the EFCs to other groups, that are here to help you. And we want to make sure that you've got the help that you need to be able to do these things really well. And I would also just say, from my experience of working with small water systems around the country on rates, is don't neglect your rate structure and don't neglect the rates that you're charging. Really be intentional about it. Have a plan as to what you're trying to do. Look at the numbers, and don't be afraid to ask for help or to download some of the tools we have for that. So we're a little bit beyond the hour. I'll wrap up there, and just to say thank you to all of you. I know many of you are busy people. I know many of you are volunteers for your water system, which is why we try to do these webinars kind of later in the working day. And you may have a day job or something unrelated to the water system. So again, just thank you for taking some time. And please join us in a couple weeks for the third webinar on regionalization and partnership options, and then the last webinar on the hydroanalytic tanks and the water loss. So with that, thank you everybody, and have a great rest of your day.